Gardner Dozois was the future of science fiction. He was their Kwisatz Haderach, and he
Johnny Michel.
And, he was their John Galt. And
who is Gardner Dozois?
And he pretty much as good as said the fact that Gardner Dozois is not today recognized as the great writer of his time is the great failure of science fiction.
Wow.
So
I hope Gardner gets that on the recording. We need that.
Let's talk a little bit about Gardner's time, because after writing one magazine story and going into the Army, he came out and began publishing it again in 1970. And the period that most of us have been talking about, save for when Michael was talking about the collaborations, which were the early to mid-'80s, more or less, we're talking about a decade.
Mm-hmm.
It ended around 1980. It ended rather abruptly. And Gardner published most of his short fiction in 1977 in a collection. He's published about 3 collections since, but all of them have had as their kernel the 4 or 5 best stories of that early era. And really, when you're talking about Gardner's career, I think some of us have kind of hinted at this. His best work was 1970 and 1980. What he's done since then has been extremely smooth and polished, very professional.
Speaking of his fiction.
Of his fiction. Yes,
we had
of his fiction. And it's worth talking about. We have talked about what he achieved. We could talk about the limits of his writing, which I thought he was bumping up against pretty hard in 1980. He wrote a story around 1980 was when he stopped writing that kind of fiction. He published a story called Disciples that year, and it was
not too long now. Go on, but don't take too long, all right? I'm the moderator.
Okay, it was a story. It was a story about the day the Messiah came. Honest to God, the Messiah came. He came. Everyone who believed in the Messiah went up to heaven, and it was the last day. If someone had told me, just before I read the story, that this was what happened in it, it was by Gardner Dozois, I would have said, the Messiah is the Jewish Messiah, right? And it's told from the point of view of a Christian who gets ditched and left behind, right? And not a believing Christian, a hypocritical Christian, a skeevy, greasy one who didn't really believe in it at all and was full of hate, and is left gnawing his fingers off with frustration and rage, as the Jews and no one else. And I'm okay. And the answer was yes. It was all of that. And by that time, you could predict that of Gardner's fiction. And I'm suggesting that he may have stopped writing with the intensity that he did because he really had emptied that mind.
I, on the other hand, think that some of the things...
Okay, you're cutting me off because you were disagreeing with me.
Well,
that's
somebody
fine,
has to disagree with it. I will just mention, but
okay.
I think that the Night of Ghosts and Shadows was definitely a very fine story, and it deals interestingly with a question. How do you deal with artificial minds that are more superior than you? And it actually refers to the Clarkians, if you've read it, because he's arguing with an idea of Arthur Clarke's. And I felt that was a very fine story, and it moved him into a whole different type of science fiction, I think, which I myself can relate to.
It was also extremely inventive, almost to the degree of a special kind of mourning inventive, right. Which was a pretty remarkable thing for him to be able to do again decades later. I think Morning Child is a very fine story, and not at all a parody of himself. And,
it was only a year or two after. It was like 1981, 82, though. We're talking not long after this period.
Night of Ghosts and Shadows?
No, Morning Child.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, but after the early 80s, a great deal of that time was taken up by becoming an editor. Mm-hmm. And the price that a writer pays becoming an editor is either all of his fiction or most of it. John W. Campbell paid all of his fiction. Gardner paid most of it. Occasionally a story will come out, but still most of his energies are going into the editing, and it's the same kind of energies that go into writing fiction. So you can't really write a lot of fiction if you're a full-time editor, because you're cheating the people whose stuff you're editing. You're taking that energy away from.
Have you read that new book of Campbell's letters?
No, I read the old one.
No, it's just out. It's Fantasy Commentator, the Memorial issue that Sam Moskowitz edited it. Langley Searles put out. It's by his widow. His widow put it out. It's a lot of letters from Campbell from the period when he just before and when he took over Astounding, and it's very similar to what you guys are talking about here, in that you can see how he was bumping up against the limits of what he was trying to write.
Okay.
And it's like his tank was emptying when he shifted over to editing the magazine, and it wasn't an immediate process, but there are bunches of letters from Campbell talking about like going over and over stories that he couldn't make work. He knew things were wrong with them, but he couldn't get them into shape, and making his wife retype them several times and still not getting it right. It's almost the relief in those letters is almost tangible when he starts editing, and he can start giving these great ideas to other people, letting them wrestle with them.
Yeah, but I think Gardner recharged somewhere in there too.
I mean, I love Gardner's fiction. I'm not trying to put it down.
No.
I was the editor for that book, in fact.
Yeah. No, I think that what he started doing later, he had kind of is a new type of thing, really.
Yeah, he moved